Welcome to a bonus episode of the Blooms and Barnacles podcast. I'm Kelly.
I'm Dermot.
And we don't have to explain ourselves to you because you've paid money to listen to this, so you probably know who we are.
You're the Illuminati.
The elite. We are here today to discuss everything related to the works of James Joyce, a particularly obscure work of James Joyce.
It's a book of dirty limericks.
And we're talking about this book, which is called Giacomo Joyce. Now, if you'd never heard of this, you'd be forgiven. And I don't think you were meant to have heard of it. Oh? Conspiracy? No. But we'll explain. So Dermot and I have both read this. It's a very brief work of James Joyce's. We're going to talk about what it is. Of course, there's controversy surrounding it. So we'll go into that at length and give our thoughts. Do you have any thoughts before we begin?
Nope.
All right. You actually read the book today?
I did.
All right. How's it feel?
Great.
Good. Giacomo Joyce. What is it? How would you describe it, Dermot? You've read it.
Yeah, it's it feels not disjointed exactly, but it's kind of different perceptions and vignettes, and he moves from scene to scene, and they seem like he's showing like little flashes of time, and yeah.
Yeah, and what story does it tell?
He's after some young one that he wants.
Yes.
Infidelity.
Yes. Where does it take place?
I got the impression it's in Italy.
Yep.
I'm assuming Trieste or somewhere like that.
Would you call it prose or poetry?
That's prose, but with Joyce, he kind of blurs the line a bit. Like, I think the gold standard would be like the last bits of the Dead. Like this is beyond prose, and it's not poetry either. But it's kind of it's blurring the line very strongly, isn't it? And a lot of his writing does. Like it's what kind of makes him stand out, I would guess. Yeah. And I got the impression from them they're incredibly personal. They all sound like memories or something very autobiographical. Which again is Joyce, right? So that's his thing.
Yes. Do you know when it was written?
Oh, 1914? Was it? Or it was published, or no, so early though, 1910, 1914, I thought, something like that.
Yeah, so it was never published. Well, it was published, but posthumously.
Yes.
It would be published for the first time in 1968. So Joyce died in the early 1940s. So it was long after his passing that it was published.
Right.
There's not an exact date on it, but given the details that are in it, it was probably written around the time that he was finishing Portrait and it was being serialized before being published as a full novel, and he was beginning Ulysses. So it's around kind of that stage of his development as an author. He wrote this. Richard Ellman, who is going to be a big character in today's story, famous Joyce scholar, if you're not familiar with him, he wrote a biography of James Joyce that is, I would think, still the best regarded James Joyce biography. It is not without its flaws, which we'll discuss a bit today. But Ellman he's not alive anymore, but he was very intimately familiar with this particular work. He was pretty instrumental in getting it published. He wrote the first introduction to it, and he described it as a love poem which is never recited. It is Joyce's attempt at the sentimental education of a dark lady, his farewell to a stage of his life, and at the same time his discovery of a new form of imaginative expression. The original version of Giacomo Joyce, it was handwritten on 8 sheets of, they're usually described as like drawing paper, because they're larger than what you'd expect to be in a book. They were written on both front and back, folded up inside of a blue school notebook, clearly written in Joyce's hand. You mentioned how the paragraphs were a bit disjointed. In their original form, they were spaced out, sometimes very broadly or very far apart on this drawing paper. I know Ellman speculated that Joyce may have been inspired by the poetic formatting of poet Stéphane Mallarmé, which we did an episode about him not too long ago, so check that out in the main feed of Blooms and Barnacles. That was sort of a hallmark of his work. It's not just the words that he was writing, but physically how they fell on the page. And there's I think either a foreword or an afterword to this tiny edition I bought at Books Upstairs in Dublin. This is basically impossible to reproduce that here, but I think in the original 60s edition Ellman put out that they tried very faithfully to reproduce it. And then on the outside of this notebook, there was a little name sticker in a different handwriting that just said Giacomo Joyce. And Giacomo is an Italian name that would be the equivalent of James. Joyce lived in a city in Italy called Trieste. Give or take, he moved there after he and Nora left Dublin at the end of 1904, and he was later joined there by his brother Stanislaus, and I believe his sister Eileen ended up in Trieste as well. He lived there for about 10 years. He had an enormous amount of books that he bought, notebooks that he was keeping, just various papery things that he had as his personal library. He eventually left Trieste with Nora and the children. Some of those things he wrote to his brother Stanislaus and asked him to send them on to Paris. And so he had those then as he was working on future works. And he wrote Portrait and I believe part of Dubliners in Trieste. The bulk of Ulysses was written in Trieste. So it was a very productive place for him creatively. He didn't have everything sent on though. So some of those remained with Stanislaus. And then once he passed, a lot of that was, I think, largely sold or donated to various scholars and collectors by Stanislaus's widow. And so that's how Richard Ellman was able to catalog Joyce's Trieste library. He was also in contact with Stanislaus when he was writing the biography, which came out in the 1950s. So some of these people were still alive. And that's also how they came into possession of this Giacomo Joyce manuscript, is it was just in those papers. When you look at it, it's clearly an artistic work. It's not just notes. I think salacious might be too strong of a word, but it's very confessional. It uses the name James and Nora. It references him working on Portrait and Ulysses. It's very, very identifiable. And the main thrust of it is his infatuation with a student. Joyce worked as an English as a second language teacher in Trieste, mainly to very upper class clients who would hire him as a private tutor. If you've ever seen the film Cabaret, it's a very similar situation to Michael York's character in that film. That's how Joyce earned his keep before he really, got famous as an author with Ulysses. So it's pretty clearly written about one of his female students. It's about him having feelings for that student. And so you can see where this gets controversial. It was really clearly never meant for publication. Joyce left Trieste without it. He didn't request Stanislaus to send it on to him. And interestingly, there are passages and turns of phrase in it that he later cannibalized and reconstituted and appear in Portrait and his play Exiles, which we did an episode about, and then also Ulysses. Like, to the point when you're reading it, you're like, oh, this is Ulysses. I know this really well. If you pick up an edition of Giacomo Joyce, or if you go on archive.org, you can get the 1960s edition and read it for free. It's all been very carefully footnoted by Richard Ellman where those passages would correspond. That's what it is. So to answer our first question, which is what? One interesting thing about it, too, I forgot to mention, is it's Joyce's only work set outside of Dublin. Because it takes place mainly in Trieste, but around Italy. It's the only work that we know about that he wrote that doesn't take place in Dublin. Yeah, a mix of prose and poetry about unrequited love between teacher and student, Richard Ellman says. Joyce scholar and founder of the Trieste James Joyce School, John McCourt, says, quote, "And yet, with its heightened awareness of form, its ample use of poetic methods, repetition, alliteration, metaphor, its intertextual nature, its combining of epiphanies, paraphrase, quotations, and descriptions, it has the polished and highly individualized finish, the conscious artistry of a creative work rather than a diary." It does seem to be intentionally a creative work. You might think you come across it and think this is just a bunch of notes, maybe it's a personal diary. It's clearly meant to be a literary work. But one, again, I don't think, 100 years on, we're meant to be sitting here in our sitting room talking about, because it's very, very personal. So the name Giacomo, right, which is the Italian form of James. People ask, why is it Giacomo Joyce? The obvious answer is that, but Ellman says that Joyce never went by Giacomo. He was always James. The Joyce family were very conversant in Italian. Their home language was Italian in the years they lived in Trieste, and then once they moved to Paris and other places, they still would speak Italian at home. He gave both of his children, Giorgio and Lucia, Italian names. In his correspondence with his daughter Lucia, they wrote to each other in Italian as well. So, but Ellman says they never went by Giacomo. Some people think it's possibly an ironic reference to Giacomo Casanova, who's a famous lover of women. And this is about Giacomo Joyce striking out pretty hard with a young woman. It's all just like lust and longing and desire and completely just never satisfied at all. He wants this girl so bad and it just it doesn't ever happen.